Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Loreplay, the podcast where haunted gets hot and bothered, and, at least in this case, true crime hooks up with paranormal. First up, though, I have to call myself out on some bullshit. A funny story, though, because I had a couple of people reach out to me and say that they either had nightmares after one of the episodes or they were like freaked out while driving down a dark back road. And I laughed and said, oh, I guess like maybe I'm too close to the stories with all of my researching because I don't really find them that scary. Like entertaining, yeah, but not scary. But that night, like literally that night, my subconscious was like, spoke too soon because every shadow turned into a demon and every house creak turned into a nightmare. I actually bought a Raggedy Ann doll so that I could make content with it. And before bed that night, it was in my closet and I kind of got like a glimpse of it. And I kind of got like a little creeped out. So I just took her downstairs to the kitchen because I didn't want her to watch me sleep. I think I freaked myself out though because my heart was like pounding out of my chest every time the house made a noise or the dogs made a noise or, I mean, anything happened. I did not sleep at all that night. I think with all of these stories that I'm researching, like it might be time to burn some sage or maybe, I don't know, swallow a handful and rinse it down with some holy water. Or wine, you know, because that's Jesus's water. Anyways, I'm your host, punk-ass bitch Dayna Pereira, and today we are kicking down the demonically stained door of the most infamous haunted house in America. Do you have any guesses? I'll give you a hint. There's definitely like a movie or 47 about it. One, including a certain actor named Ryan Reynolds. Does that help? Okay, last clue, and it's a big one. Walls, oozing, slime. If you didn't guess it on that one, it might be your first time actually hearing this story, which is great. But if you have heard it, you've probably guessed that we are pulling up to 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, New York. If you've seen the Amityville Horror, you know the imagery. Flies swarming in winter, crucifixes turning upside down, slime oozing down the walls like Nickelodeon on bath salts. But before Hollywood grabbed it and prettied it up with Ryan Reynolds' face and abs, the Amityville house had a much darker beginning. And this part is not funny. This part is tragic because before it was a movie, before it was a franchise, before it was a meme, Amityville was a crime scene. The Amityville saga didn't start with ghosts. It started with a massacre. We start in a picture-perfect town with a picture-perfect home. A big Dutch colonial, painted white with a shingled roof, a boathouse on the river, and those 2 quarter-moon attic windows staring out like eyes. Amityville is your typical sleepy suburban town, where the biggest scandal is usually Karen stole your newspaper off your lawn. Again. From the outside, it's the American dream. But behind closed doors, well, let's just say that if people want you to assume their lives are perfect, odds are it's far from it. The people behind that closed door were the DeFeos. Ronald DeFeo Sr., aka Big Ronnie, was the father. Domineering, loud, quick-tempered. He wanted to project success, nice cars, big house, big Catholic family. He was a larger-than-life presence known for his booming voice, anger problems, and the need to control everything and everyone under his roof. Neighbors often described him as loud, intimidating, and aggressive. Inside the house, that temper boiled over constantly. He wasn't the type of dad that gave warm hugs and bedtime stories. He gave orders, arguments, and hands if you dared to be disobedient. Louise DeFeo, his wife, was described as more gentle, warm, and motherly compared to her husband. Friends and neighbors often thought that she was beautiful and caring, but she was also trapped, both by Big Ronnie's controlling personality and by the family image. Louise grew up Catholic, loyal to her family, and she put on the mask of the dutiful housewife, even while enduring a lot at home. She grew up with money, her family owned car dealerships, and people would whisper that Big Ronnie resented her and her family because he needed to lean on them for financial help. Oh, those fragile egos. He spent so much time trying to make the outside world see him a certain way, and everyone saw right through the facade anyways. They raised 5 kids in a house that looked like a dream from the outside, but on the inside, we're talking pressure cooker. Their kids, Dawn, 18, Allison, 13, Mark, 12, John Matthew, 9, and the eldest, Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., who was 23. Butch bore the brunt of Ronnie's wrath. Louise tried to soften it, but even she couldn't shield him completely. By the fall of 1974, the DeFeo household wasn't just tense. It was explosive. And Butch, he's the one that this whole thing is about to hinge on. Butch had problems. By his early 20s, he was already spiraling. I mean, I can't imagine why. Nobody ever rebels after being pummeled into submission for their entire childhood. I mean, insert eye roll here. Totally shocking that a lifetime of being terrorized didn't produce a well-adjusted Eagle Scout. He was using heroin and LSD, and he was violent, once pointing a gun at his father during a fight. He stole money from the dealership his grandfather owned, where he worked, by the way. He carried himself with this angry, volatile energy that made people nervous. He hated his father, and his father hated him. Their relationship was a constant war zone, and the rest of the family, they were stuck in the crossfire. While the DeFeo house looked perfect from the street, inside it was tense, toxic, and teetering. And then came the night of November 13th, 1974. It's about 3:15 in the morning. The rest of the house is asleep. Butch picks up his father's .35 caliber Marlin rifle. First, he goes to his parents' room. His father and mother asleep in bed. 2 shots each. They never wake up. Then he moves to Dawn's room, then to Allison's room, then to Mark's room, and finally to John Matthews. 1 shot each. 6 family members killed in their beds. And here's what shocked investigators. Every single one of them was found face down. No signs of struggle. No one tried to run. No one screamed loud enough for neighbors to hear. And this wasn't a silenced weapon. It was a loud rifle. So how does one person shoot 6 people in a house in the middle of the night and not wake the others? Were they drugged? Did someone else help? And maybe it's too early to say this, but considering what comes later, it's been suggested it could have been some sinister supernatural thing. Nobody has ever fully explained it. The next morning, Butch showers, gets dressed, and carries on like nothing happened. He went to work at the dealership, hung out with friends, and then came back home. At around 6:30 p.m., he runs into a local bar called Henry's, and he's shouting, "You gotta help me! I think my mother and father are shot!" Neighbors rushed with him back to 112 Ocean Avenue. They found the scene. 6 bodies, parents and siblings gone. The news spread quickly through Amityville. a quiet, wealthy little town where crime usually meant someone's lawn flamingo went missing. And now they had a family massacre. Police questioned Butch, and at first he's playing the grieving son card. He said maybe it was the mob. After all, his family had ties to the Italian American community. And Butch liked to dabble in mob cosplay, tough guy energy. But within 24 hours, his story completely collapses. The evidence didn't add up, and eventually he confesses. He said, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." The trial came in 1975. His defense lawyer, William Weber, tried the insanity angle. Butch claimed he heard voices telling him to kill, that he was possessed, but psychiatrists weren't buying it. They diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder. Translation, he knew what he was doing, he just didn't give a fuck. The jury agreed, and on November 21st, 1975, Butch was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life on each count. And just like that, the DeFeo family was gone. Butch went to prison, and 112 Ocean Avenue, that beautiful Dutch colonial, was left standing, soaked in tragedy. And that is where the story really begins. Not with ghosts, not with flies or slime, but with a shotgun, a broken family, and 6 bodies lying face down in their beds. Because houses like this don't just go back to normal. You don't just wipe down the walls, put the mattresses on the curb, and call it a day. A house remembers. And when the next family moves in, they're not just unpacking boxes. They're unpacking all that blood, all that fear, all that leftover energy. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue now had blood in its walls, and a town that definitely had a for sale sign problem on Ocean Avenue. But here's the thing about America. We love a bargain, even if it comes wrapped in bloodstains. And that is where we meet the Lutz family. Because nothing says fresh start like buying a murder house. If you were anything like me, you might be fucking fascinated to learn about the people that were like, 6 murders? I smell a discount. Because, bitch, that is 6 murders too many. But alas, let's meet the Lutz family. George was 28 at the time, ex-Marine, stocky, bearded, the kind of guy who believed strongly in discipline and chopping wood until his forearms begged for mercy. He ran a land surveying business and had a bit of a temper, though not nearly on the scale of Big Ronnie DeFeo. He wasn't Catholic, but when he married Kathy, he tried to fit into her religious world. Kathy was 30, beautiful, warm, and the mom of 3 kids from her first marriage. She was the glue of the family, as women often are. She was deeply Catholic, loving, and she really wanted this second marriage to work, not just for herself, but to give her kids some stability after the divorce. Daniel was 9, and he was stubborn, tough, and didn't get along great with George at first. Imagine a kid who side-eyes every new role, like, "You're not my dad." Christopher was 7. He was more sensitive, more reserved, and he felt the weirdness of the house deeply. And then we have Missy. She's the youngest. She's 5. She was sweet and imaginative, talkative, the kind of kid who could make a game out of anything. Together, they were a blended family, just trying to figure it out. George stepped into the stepdad role like, "I'm the man of the house now." But the kids weren't exactly calling him dad just yet. There was tension. Daniel especially clashed with George, but they were trying. They wanted a fresh start. And then, in late 1975, their realtor dangled temptation right in front of them. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue had been on the market since the murders, Most buyers noped the fuck out immediately, but the Lutzes, they saw 6 bedrooms, a pool, a boathouse on the river, and a price tag of $80,000 in Long Island. Money wasn't unlimited. They did okay, but the house, even discounted for murder, was still a stretch. And raising 3 kids isn't exactly a bargain bin situation. Stress was baked into the deal before they even moved in. So when the realtor was like, "Oh, hey, 6 people were murdered here, but look at that riverfront view," they weren't thinking demons. They were thinking affordable mansion. It was basically half off for the low cost of 6 human lives. Yes, they were told about the murders. Yes, they walked in knowing 6 coffins had just been rolled out a year earlier. But Kathy thought her Catholic faith would protect them, and George thought ghosts aren't real, and even if they are, I can hang out with a few because, boathouse. So they bought it. December 18th, 1975, 1 week before Christmas, the Lutzes moved into their demon dream house. It's picturesque. Crisp winter air, snow outside, wreath on the door, a decorated Christmas tree glowing in the window. The kids tearing through the place, claiming bedrooms, shouting across staircases. It was perfect, like Hallmark card perfect, the American dream. But murder houses don't do Hallmark for long. See, Kathy wasn't naive. She knew what had gone down inside those walls, and she figured it's nothing that a little holy water couldn't bless out of it, since, water that had the sign of the cross done over it has solved so many other world problems. She wanted a priest to bless the house before they fully settled in, so she called a family friend, Father Ralph Pecoraro. I am definitely saying that wrong, so from here on out, we're just going to call him Father Ralph. Father Ralph shows up doing what Father Ralph does. Walks from room to room, sprinkling holy water, reciting prayers, and George is trailing behind him politely. Everything seems fine. Until he gets to the sewing room upstairs. This is a room that was once used by the DeFeo boys, and when Father Ralph begins his prayer there, he suddenly hears it. A voice, low, male, guttural, and it says, "Get out." Not a suggestion, not, "Excuse me, sir, can you please leave?" A command or a threat. The priest freezes. The air turns heavy, and he feels something slap him across the face, hard, like an invisible hand. And later, his hands break out into painful blisters, which does make me wonder, Father, do you have a secret? Because you probably shouldn't be burning from holy water. Unless, of course, it was the demons, in which case I take it all back. He doesn't tell George and Kathy everything. Maybe he doesn't want to freak them out, but he warns them, do not go in that room. From day 1, things felt off. George started waking up at 3:15 a.m. every single night, which, a fun fact, just so happened to be the approximate time of the DeFeo murders. At first, he brushed it off. Insomnia, stress, maybe just the house creaking. But it kept happening, night after night, always at 3:15. But it wasn't just sleep. George became obsessed with the fireplace. No matter how much wood George chopped, the house stayed freezing. He couldn't get warm no matter how much he stoked it. He chopped wood constantly, like a man possessed. Friends even started joking that he looked like a lumberjack with OCD. But Kathy noticed something darker. His temper flaring, his eyes distant. And when a man is swinging an axe, the last thing you want is for his temper to flare and for his eyes to go distant. Literally ask anyone that was axed to death in the 1800s. Kathy, meanwhile, started having vivid nightmares of the murders. Not just generic scary dreams, specific details. Who was shot where, in which room, how it happened. She'd wake up terrified, unable to shake them. The murders were already gruesome and horrible enough just in the retelling, but to be dreaming specific details of them is next level terrifying. The kids, too, were unsettled. Daniel and Christopher's beds would shake, toys moved across the floor, doors slammed. But it was Missy, little 5-year-old Missy, who brought the real nightmare fuel. She told Kathy she had a new friend, an imaginary friend. Its name, Jody. Jody, she said, was a pig. But not like a cute pig. We're not talking sweet little Wilbur and Charlotte's Web. We are talking a giant pig with glowing red eyes. One night, George was walking past Missy's room. She was sitting by the window, whispering and laughing, and he glanced toward the glass and froze. 2 glowing red eyes staring back at him from the darkness outside. The eyes were too high off the ground to be a dog and too big to be a cat. They were just there. And when his brain finally stopped malfunctioning, he bolts outside to catch whatever it was. He runs around to the yard beneath Missy's window, heart pounding, expecting to see footprints in the snow or a raccoon or a prankster, anything, something. Although, if there were a prankster at the window chit-chatting with a 5-year-old, that wouldn't be a prankster anymore. That would be body number 7, in my opinion. But there was nothing. No prints, no marks, just untouched snow, empty yard, silent darkness. When he rushed back in, Missy was still at the window, smiling. And that's when George realized this wasn't just a child's imagination. Something was in the house with them. And whatever it was, it liked his stepdaughter. Imagine trying to bond with your new stepdaughter, and she's like, "This is my friend Jody. Don't mind the glowing red eyes. Also, my bedtime is whenever the fuck I say it is because I'm the one that's friends with the demon pig. Got it?" And the house? Oh, babes. The house wasn't done. At first, it was little quirks, things that you could excuse if you were determined to make this place your dream home. But very quickly, those quirks started to pile up, and they weren't the kind of things that you could chalk up to drafty old house anymore. Let's start with the cold spots. Picture walking down your hallway. 1 second, it's warm, cozy, Christmas candles burning. And then bam, like you just stepped into the freezer. Breath visible, skin prickling. And then, 2 seconds later, back to normal, like nothing happened. George would walk through with an armful of firewood, sweating from chopping logs like goddamn Paul Bunyan. And then suddenly, his teeth would be chattering like he'd been dunked in an ice bath. But the kicker? The heating system was working fine. The thermostat read normal, but entire corners of the house felt like walk-in meat lockers. And then came the smells. Sometimes it was sweet, like flowers or perfume, something pleasant enough to make you stop and sniff the air. And then, without warning, it would flip, rotten, like sewage bubbling up from under the floorboards. I get the cold spots, but assaulting their nostrils, that is straight diabolical. Kathy would light candles, spray air freshener, scrub the house, and still it would come back. That mix of perfume and rot. Like whatever was there was trying to lure them in and then remind them it wasn't human. And then the flies. Now remember, this is December in New York. You know what doesn't exist in the dead of Long Island winter? Flies. And yet, the sewing room, the same room Father Ralph warned them about, would fill with them, buzzing, swarming, crawling all over the windows until the glass looked black. George and Kathy would swat them down, kill dozens, maybe even hundreds, clean the room, close the door, And the next day, they'd be back. Fresh swarm, like the room itself was a magnet for rot. And then as fast as they came, they'd vanish. Room spotless again, like nothing happened, until it started over. But the house saved its most theatrical trick for last. Green slime. Yeah, I said slime. Thick, sticky goo oozing out of the walls, dripping from the keyholes of locked doors, sliding down like the house had sprung a leak straight from hell. Imagine waking up in your dream home, walking into a room, and seeing pea green fluid dripping down the wall like Slimer just jerked off on your wallpaper. George would wipe it clean only for it to seep back. There was no explaining it. It wasn't water damage, it wasn't mold, it was slime. And while all of this was happening, George himself was changing. He stopped shaving, he stopped eating, dropping weight, his temper grew shorter and his eyes hollow. He'd stand in front of the fire for hours, just staring into the flames like they were whispering back to him. Neighbors said when they passed by, they hardly recognized him. He was starting to resemble Butch DeFeo, the man who had slaughtered his family there just a year beforehand. Same shaggy beard, same wild eyes, as if the house was reshaping George into its next murderer. And Kathy, she wasn't spared either. One night, she jolted awake to find herself floating, levitating inches above the bed, her arms pinned to her sides, her body weightless. George claimed he saw her rise up, mouth open, as if something unseen had lifted her. Another night, George rolled over and screamed because instead of his young wife, he saw an old crone lying beside him. Wrinkled skin, sunken cheeks, eyes staring back at him with centuries of decay. When Kathy finally woke fully, she had no idea what he was talking about. But her body told the story. She was covered in welts and claw marks, red and raw, as if she'd been scratched by invisible hands in her sleep. This wasn't after months of haunting. This wasn't after years of wear and tear. This was just in the first 2 weeks. 2 weeks in, and the house had already wormed its way into George's mind, into Kathy's body, and into the kids' core memories. Like, ouch, that's gonna leave a mark. Most families would have been already out the door, booking the nearest Holiday Inn and never looking back. Fuck most families, I would have made it precisely one cold spot before bailing. But the Lutzes, they stayed. Maybe denial, maybe stubbornness. Maybe just the reality that they'd sunk their entire savings into this murder discount mansion and they couldn't exactly afford a plan B. But the longer they stayed, the worse it got. Now, let's go back to Father Ralph for a second. Remember him, the priest that came to bless the house and got bitch slapped? Well, he didn't exactly get off easy. After that visit, he tried to check in on the family. But every time he called the house, the line filled with static. Then a deep, booming voice would cut in saying things like, "Will you stop?" The priest himself later said that the phone line went haywire whenever he tried to reach the Lutzes, and he became ill, high fever, blisters on his hands, a sense of being physically attacked whenever he thought of the house. So, yeah, whatever this is didn't just stay inside the 4 walls, it reached through the damn telephone. Meanwhile, George was slipping deeper into obsession. He was waking up every night at 3:15 a.m. He was chopping wood like it was a competitive sport, and he was isolating from everyone else. He started snapping at Kathy. The kids were terrified of him, and friends who came by said George looked gaunt, dirty, and barely responsive, like something else was steering his wheel. At one point, he claimed to hear the front door slam open in the middle of the night, He runs downstairs, shotgun in hand, ready to chase off an intruder. But the door was locked, deadbolted. No sign anyone had entered, except the family dog, Harry, a black lab, was found cowering outside, tethered to his chain, barking frantically at the house. Kathy's experiences grew darker too. She kept having dreams of the DeFeo murders, exact grisly details. She swore she could see the beds, the gunshots, the positions of the bodies. She would wake in a sweat, convinced the house was showing her its own memories. One night, she claimed something unseen embraced her from behind in bed. At first, she thought it was George, just copping a feel. Then she realized George was across the room, staring blankly into the fire, which is creepy. Like, we already know dude has a gun. Maybe we take that and, like, hide it at the bottom of the river for a little while. Another time, she said invisible hands pinned her down, pressing her face into the pillow until she could barely breathe. She clawed her way up, gasping for air, welts across her chest. And then there was Missy and her friend, Jody. Missy kept talking to the pig demon. She said Jody could change size, sometimes small like a stuffed animal and sometimes big enough to fill her window. One night, Kathy went into Missy's room and found a rocking chair moving on its own. Missy was sitting cross-legged on the floor, whispering to someone who wasn't there. When Kathy asked who, Missy smiled sweetly and said, "Jody says you can't hurt her. Jody says she'll always be my friend." And you know what, Missy? That's not a flex. That's how you get yourself strapped to a bed and have priests perform exorcisms on you. So maybe brag less about your interactions with the Freddy Krueger of swine. By the final week, the house wasn't just haunted, it was hostile. Doors ripped off hinges, windows slammed down on people's hands. Crucifixes hung in the home spun upside down. George claimed he heard a marching band stomping through the living room at night, horns blaring, drums pounding, but when he ran downstairs, silence. The family's personalities were fracturing. George was angry, paranoid, gaunt, has a new vendetta against every drumline. And Kathy, exhausted, marked, dreaming of death. The kids crying, fighting, terrified. And then came the final night. January 14th, 1976. The family was in bed when the atmosphere in the house turned suffocating. The temperature plummeted. The sounds of footsteps and banging echoed through the halls. Kathy screamed as she once again felt herself pinned to the mattress by invisible hands. George swore he saw figures moving in the darkness, shadow people standing at the end of the bed. Missy was having the time of her life, though. She was giggling, saying Jody was with her. Doors slammed, the dog barked and whined, and then it all went quiet. Whatever happened in those final hours, the Lutzes never described in detail. George only ever said it was too terrifying to talk about. By morning, the decision was made. They grabbed the kids, they grabbed the dog, they fled the house, leaving furniture, clothes, food in the fridge. Like, here you go, demons, that leftover meatloaf is all yours now. They never spent another night inside of 112 Ocean Avenue. 28 days. That's all they lasted. And yet, in less than a month, the legend of Amityville was born. And what happens when you flee a haunted house and leave all of your belongings behind? Well, if you're in America, it doesn't just stay a haunting. Oh no, it becomes content, even in the 70s. And, as it turns out, we are already familiar with this paranormal power couple, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Yes, the same Warrens we covered with the Annabelle doll. As a refresher, Ed was a self-taught demonologist. Lorraine was a clairvoyant. Together, they were like Ghostbusters, but trade the proton packs for rosaries and add in really good PR. In February 1976, just weeks after the Lutzes fled, the Warrens and a team of investigators entered the Amityville house. Lorraine later claimed she was nearly overwhelmed with the demonic energy inside. Ed declared it one of the most powerful hauntings they'd ever encountered. And from that investigation, we get one of the most infamous paranormal photos ever taken, the Ghost Boy, which will obviously be posted to social media. Here's the scene. The investigators had set up automatic cameras throughout the house. One of those cameras caught a grainy black and white image of what looks like a small boy peeking out of a doorway. The boy's eyes are glowing white, his hair is dark, and he looks eerily like John Matthew DeFeo, the youngest DeFeo boy murdered in that house. Now, skeptics point out that one of the investigators present that night was a short man with dark hair, and the photo could have been a simple misfire. But believers, they swear it's the spirit of one of the murdered children. Either way, it cemented the house as a paranormal icon. Later that same year, the story got the treatment every American horror story wishes for. A book deal. Author Jay Anson published the Amityville Horror in 1977, based on hours of taped interviews with George and Kathy Lutz. It was a bestseller, like flying off the shelves. Readers couldn't get enough of the flies and the slime, the levitations, and the pig demon. It took everything the Lutzes said and packaged it into a spooky, cinematic narrative. Was it exaggerated? Almost definitely. But was it profitable? Oh, hell yes. And then Hollywood came calling, because ain't no way they're going to let a book take all the money. We must make it into the movies and cash in even more. In 1979, the Amityville Horror movie was released, starring James Brolin and Margot Kidder. It was a massive hit, and let me tell you, the 1970s audience ate this up. Houses bleeding black goo, priests getting smacked around by invisible forces, a pig with glowing eyes. Say less, we're in. That movie made so much money, it practically invented the haunted house blockbuster. And like any successful horror film, it spawned sequels and remakes and reboots. At this point, there are over 30 films with Amityville in the title, including Amityville in Space. Yes, that's real. So, yeah, Amityville didn't just become a haunting, it became a franchise. But not everyone was buying what the Lutzes were selling. Journalists, skeptics, even some family members started poking holes in the story. The most damning claim came from none other than William Weber, Butch DeFeo's defense attorney. He admitted that he, George, and Kathy had brainstormed the haunting story together over several bottles of wine. Weber said that the whole thing was cooked up as a way to make money. The Lutzes would get their book, Weber would get publicity for Butch's insanity defense. Everybody wins, except, the truth. Even some of the Lutz kids, as adults, later contradicted parts of the haunting. Daniel swore it was real. Christopher called it exaggerated, and Missy kept quiet. The family itself couldn't agree. And again, because this is America, lawsuits are coming. Neighbors sued over invasion of privacy, writers sued over rights, the Lutzes sued filmmakers for distorting their story, William Weber sued the Lutzes for cutting him out of the profits. Basically, everyone was suing everyone, and the only ones really winning were the lawyers. But here's the thing. Whether it was real, exaggerated, or a flat-out hoax, it didn't matter. The Amityville Horror had entered pop culture. It became shorthand for haunted house. It made paranormal investigators celebrities. It inspired movies, books, documentaries, memes, Halloween decorations. To this day, if you mention Amityville, even people that don't believe in ghosts or watch horror films know exactly what you're talking about. Although they could just be Ryan Reynolds and James Brolin superfans. Who knows? Whether you believe the Lutzes or not is up to you. But the 6 murders were real. The crime scene was real. The trauma was real. But the haunting? That's up for debate. The only people that lived it were the Lutzes, and they took their version of events to their graves. As a shock to absolutely no one, George and Kathy did not stay married for life. They remained together for a number of years after the experience, but their relationship eventually crumbled under the weight of money problems, the media circus, and the strain of being forever linked to the Amityville Horror. They divorced in the late 1980s. Kathy Lutz died in August 2004 at the age of 57. The cause of death was emphysema. George Lutz died less than 2 years later in May of 2006 at the age of 59. His cause of death was heart disease. Even after their divorce, though, both George and Kathy stuck to their story that what happened in Amityville was real. They admitted some exaggerations may have slipped in, especially through Jay Anson's book, but neither ever recanted their claim that they lived through something terrifying at 112 Ocean Avenue. Skeptics will always roll their eyes. Believers will always whisper Amityville with a little shiver. And Hollywood? They'll just keep cranking out sequels until they're finally filming Amityville, the musical on ice. What we do know is this. Amityville remains the most famous haunted house in America. Not because of what did or didn't happen, but because it blended true crime, paranormal horror, and pop culture into one messy, terrifying cocktail. Well, guys, speaking of cocktail, that is it for this week's episode. Please remember to rate, review, and send to some friends, or I may just have to send my imaginary demon pig after you. We will see you next week, and until then, maybe don't use someone else's tragic massacre to get a discount on your Colonial.